Hey everybody, this is Nicole and I'm refilming the footage for the second installment of the Uncivilized Nation video footage. I filmed all this last night and every last minute of my footage got deleted. Woo! So I've already had to try one take of this and I'm going to try and get through this one without making a mistake. I have notes, but we all know how that goes with me. But here we go. The first thing I want to say, though, is I hope everybody's doing okay, and I hope that you are practicing social distancing to try and protect the most vulnerable in our community. Let's all work together, people. This is not about us individually. This is about us collectively in our cities, states, and as a nation. And unless we cooperate with what our governments and local institutions are asking us to do, vulnerable people are going to be hurt and possibly die. So I thank you for those of you who are already practicing social distancing as best you can, and I implore you, if you're not, please start. But on to our topic of the day, my lovely earthlings. Our topic today is colorblindness. So the reason that I want to talk about colorblindness and colorblind ideology is because it is a very common defense mechanism for white people, and it is one of the most common roadblocks for having conversations about race and for correcting people when they've done something racist. So I think it's a pretty good way to start off a series on how white people can be better allies. So that's why we're talking about it today. To give a working definition of colorblindness, I am explaining it as a defense mechanism used by white people to prove that they aren't racist by saying that they don't see or notice race. Usually when white people claim to be colorblind, what we think we're saying is some iteration of what Dr. King said in his I Have a Dream speech, that we judge people by the content of their character and not the color of their skin. That's what we think we're saying. But what we're actually saying, and what Black people and people of color definitely hear when we say that we are colorblind, is that we do see their race and we think it's bad that they're different from us, i.e. not white, and so we're going to ignore their race and ignore how their race has impacted their life, and ignore what Black people and people of color love about their race and being Black or being brown, and all the beautiful variations that exist therein. So like I said, one of the best explanations for what colorblindness does to a conversation about race. I interviewed a very good friend of mine who is a Black woman about 3 weeks ago. And she said that when white people tell me they're colorblind, I'm paraphrasing, but when white people tell me they're colorblind, they're trying to tell me that they don't mean me any harm and that they're not racist. But what I know is that they know that I'm different and they think that that's bad. And they can't acknowledge how the ways that we're different is actually good. The ways we're different are actually good because they allow us to have different perspectives. They're ignoring how my race has affected my life and the way that I live and the opportunities that I've had. And they're also ignoring the things that I love about myself in doing so. So saying that you're colorblind is actually a form of racism. So thank you to my friend for giving me that wonderful explanation of being colorblind. And I think the irony of white people using the term colorblind is that it actually reveals how much we do see color and how much implicit bias we actually have. So the first way I'm going to explain this is that white people don't walk around touting being colorblind as a personality trait. It is a form of virtue signaling that we use when we have been called out for doing something, saying something, or just generally being racist. We use it as a defense mechanism because white people see or have built a belief for ourselves that racism is a lack of moral character. And when we are called racist, or we're told that something we've done or said is racist, we feel like it's an attack on our character. And you can be a good person but still be racist. That is a thing that's possible, because racism isn't a character flaw. I mean, it can be, but racism isn't a character flaw generally. It's a system that we participate in whether we know it or not. So we use this defense to defend our character. And it only pops up, again, when we don't use it as a description for ourselves in our daily lives. We use it when we've been called out as a defense mechanism. So in that moment, we reveal that we really do see color. The other way that we know that white people really do see color is because there have been a multitude of studies that show the implicit bias that white people have and use while simultaneously claiming that they don't. So the study that I want to highlight was performed by Marianne Bertrand and Santil Mulnayanathan. And if I mispronounced either of those names, please correct me in the comments, because I hate saying people's names wrong. But it was performed by these two social scientists through the National Bureau of Economic Research. And what these people did is what they wanted to do was study how having a Black or Afrocentric name impacted your employment opportunities. Because they had a hunch or had observed that people with Black names or Afrocentric sounding names who sent in resumes were less likely to get called into an interview. So they wanted to see if that was purely anecdotal or if they could actually prove that. So what they did is they responded to over 1,300 employment ads. They sent out 5,000 resumes. And the thing about these resumes is that they were sent out in sets to various employers. And so the resumes would have the same level of education. The resumes were exactly the same. They had the same level of education, the same universities, the same job experiences, the same years of experience, the same certifications. Everything's the same. The only difference is that one resume would have a white sounding name in the header, and one would have a Black or Afrocentric name in the header. And so an example of the names that they had is that one essay, or geez, you can tell I've been tutoring all day. One resume set would have one of the resumes would have the name James on it, and the other essay would have, y'all, I'm gonna lose my mind. Oh man, I've been looking at too many essays over the last 48 hours. But the one resume would have the name James on it, which most of us associate with white people, and the other resume would have the name Jaquan on it, which most of us would assume, if we're being honest, most of us would assume is the name of a Black person. So they sent out these resumes, and what they found is that for a white person needed to send out, or a white person in this theoretical scheme needed to send out 10 resumes to get a callback. But a Black person had to send out 15 resumes to get a callback for an interview. That's a 50% gap. That's a 50% gap in callbacks for interviews. That can only really be explained by the differences in the names, because again, the resumes are exactly the same, and this was a double-blind study. So in effect, just having a white name on the resume gave the imagined individual the equivalent of 8 years of experience on their resume in terms of whether or not they received a callback for an interview. And we know that racism is at play here because the vast majority of hiring managers in the United States are white, particularly in the industries in which these resumes were being sent. So resumes were being sent to sales positions, administrative positions, customer service positions, and other clerical positions, which are public facing. And in which the majority of people that you're dealing with are white. And the majority of the hiring managers in these industries are white. So that's how we know that it's tied to, that the reactions to the names on the resumes are racist. So again, this is not the only study that shows the fact that white people definitely see color, whether they claim to or not. There are other studies that show this. So, for example, there are statistical analyses of white people's perceptions of different hair types, and overwhelmingly, white people generally see black women's hair as unprofessional when worn naturally. There are other statistical analyses that show that black children, especially black boys, are perceived as being older and more dangerous than white children, and particularly white boys of the same age. Black people, a statistical analysis also showed that black people are still more likely to be excluded from juries in criminal trials. So there's a lot of evidence to show that we as white people very much see color. We just don't want to admit it. And I think it's because that to admit we see color would be to admit that we've absorbed racism from growing up in the United States. You know, the United States was founded on ideas of white supremacy and racism. Our institutions have racism baked in. There's really no way as a white person in the US that you don't grow up and absorb that. And the vast majority of us, white people, are able to go through our lives not really having to think about whiteness, and we make this claim of colorblindness, but we aren't. The data shows that we aren't. So then this begs the question of what can white people do about this implicit bias instead of claiming that we're colorblind? So the first thing that we have to do is recognize and accept that our whiteness gives us an immense amount of privilege, and that this privilege comes because of systemic racism, and that this systemic racism means that we do act in racist ways, that we do in fact hold racist beliefs, that there's no way that we couldn't. We have to accept that about ourselves. And admittedly, I've been doing this work myself over the last almost a year now. It's painful work, it's difficult work, it's uncomfortable work. But it's work that we have to do. But luckily, Black people and other people of color and some white people have been writing about these issues for hundreds of years, at least 400 years. So there is a plethora of resources that you can use to help you go through this soul searching. And three that I want to highlight are So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijoima Aluo. Again, if I mispronounce that name, please comment below. How to Be Less Stupid About Race by Crystal Marie Fleming, and White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. Those are really helpful books. Again, they're tough reads because it's sometimes an unwelcome look in the mirror, but they're worth it to do that emotional labor of accepting your privilege and accepting the racism that you have absorbed. The second thing that we have to learn to do is to accept correction from Black people and other people of color. The same friend who gave me the fabulous explanation of colorblind ideology also helped me understand the value of being corrected. And what she explained to me is that if a Black person or another person of color chooses to correct you as a white person, what they're saying is that they have deemed you worthy of their very valuable time and energy because they think that you are capable of learning and changing, that if they didn't, they wouldn't waste their time. So if a Black person or another person of color chooses to correct you, you need to understand that they are taking a risk on you, but that they also see you as able to change your behavior, which we need to learn to appreciate. The thing I will say about being corrected is a lot of times white people, the excuse they use for rejecting correction is that they don't like the delivery, that they say that people are too loud or too harsh or too mean. And another thing that has been statistically proven is that white people perceive correction and leadership from Black people and other people of color as being threatening. So in all likelihood, your reaction to the person giving you the correction is not reliable, because you're viewing it through the lens of your whiteness. So the thing you have to do, and that they're likely not being mean and not being harsh. We just hear it that way because we perceive any kind of feedback from Black people and people of color as being threatening, because it threatens our concept of ourself. So the thing that you have to keep in mind is when you get these kinds of corrections, you really have to check your privilege and you really have to check your emotions, and you have to take what they've said and use it as a mirror for your life and figure out how to apply it in your life, because their feedback is so valuable. The third thing that we as white people have to do is we have to move beyond niceness. Being nice is not the same as being anti-racist. Being nice is really just putting a Band-Aid on the issue of systemic racism, because you can be incredibly nice and still behave in incredibly racist ways. So it's important for us as white people to look for and then do things directly that contribute to breaking down racism. So some examples of things that you can do are shopping, making the conscious choice to buy from Black creators and other creators of color, buy tickets to their shows, buy their music, go to their stores, buy their products, use their services. That's the first thing that you can do. The second thing that you can do is to vote and fundraise and campaign for Black political candidates and political candidates of color, because representation really does matter. The more variety of perspectives that we have, the better decisions that we can make. And there is our government is majority white. I think Congress is 87% white right now, and the voices of Black people and people of color need to be heard, and that can really only happen if they're elected to public office. So we as white people need to be consciously choosing to support Black political candidates and political candidates of color, and that doesn't just include our time, that also needs to include our money, because fundraising is often a major barrier to these candidates. The third thing that you can do, as an example, is to lobby HR. Many companies, particularly businesses, have very discriminatory dress codes, particularly against Black women's hair. So a thing that you can do is to lobby HR to remove these discriminatory rules, have protests within the office to protect Black women's rights, to protect and honor Black women's right to wear their hair the way it naturally grows out of their head. These are just 3 things that you can do. Obviously, there are more, and they range in size, but again, being nice, being polite isn't enough. You actually have to generally physically do something. Again, thank you for tuning in to this installment. I'm in the process of trying to figure out right now what I want to do next. I still need people to sign up for my newsletter because I am in the process of working on some exclusive content for people who sign up for my newsletter. And again, please, while you have a lot of downtime, please go take my survey and sign up to do an interview by phone or video chat. But again, thank you to everyone who's supporting this project. I am aware that it's controversial. I'm aware that it's difficult. I know that I'm not getting everything right. So I very much appreciate the people who've been willing to mentor me through this process and correct me when I'm wrong. And I'm thankful for the people who have been willing to listen to me, ask questions, and help me work through the challenges of taking on this project. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart for the support you've given me and the support you continue to give. And I will talk to you all soon. Next blog will, in fact, be out in 2 weeks, like I promised last time. I'm not going to get bogged down again, I promise y'all. Talk to you soon.